Probably the strangest experience I've ever had in the 20 years or so that I've been doing journalism and writing about politics was that starting around 4, 5, maybe 6 years ago, it basically became a consensus among a lot of left liberals that I somehow have changed my views, that I have gone from what they perceived as the left, or at least left liberalism, and have become some sort of far-right Trump supporter. And the reason I say that it's so strange is not because I care how people label me. It's because I honestly haven't changed a single one of my defining views at all. You can go back and read my early blog that I created out of nowhere in 2005 and 2006, and then my articles at Salon, and then my articles and reporting in The Guardian, and then everything I did at The Intercept, and interviews and speeches that I've given over the years. And on the core issues, everything is essentially the same. I'm not even boasting about that. Maybe it's good to evolve and have different views on the key issues that you focus on much, but the reality is that I just haven't. I began by focusing on the evils of the security state during the war on terror, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, Homeland Security. I've always been a vehement advocate of free speech against any attempt to censor, especially censor the internet. And all these principles have just continued, including my basic view about journalism. And yet somehow you stand in the same place and then you get increasingly accused of having shifted, even though you haven't actually moved at all. Because so often what changes is the political factions around you. One of the defining staples of left politics in the West for decades, as I understood it when I first became acquainted with what that meant, as I studied more about the history of the 20th century and how both left and right, liberal and conservative movements emerged, was a very ingrained and justifiable skepticism about, even concern for and contempt for, the part of our government that operates in secret, that is a permanent power faction in Washington, and that can exercise immense powers completely in the dark. The CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the Pentagon, Homeland Security. I mean, this has been a staple, an anchor of left liberal politics, especially left-wing politics, for as long as I can remember. And I defy any of you now to go and try and find a member of the political faction in Washington who identifies as left-wing that ever talks about any of those issues or any of those agencies in anything remotely resembling a derogatory way. It never happens. If you go to Capitol Hill, you go to mainstream media outlets, the only people who ever speak negatively or critically or skeptically of the pronouncements and behavior of those agencies are now people who identify as being on the populist right. You can certainly find some people on the left who don't want to be part of the Democratic Party who still are focused on these issues, but by and large, it is the Democratic Party that has become an increasingly pro-establishment party, including the left liberal wing of that party that through the 1960s and 1970s defined themselves based on counterculture and anti-establishment politics. They are now the most pro-establishment faction in all of our politics, the ones who demand that you have to obey every pronouncement of the CDC, put on masks the minute they tell you to, not question vaccines, and be grateful when the CIA and FBI and Homeland Security do anything because they're really good people acting benevolently in our own interests. I mean, it is a complete reversal of how politics has for decades in the United States been defined. And you don't need to take my word for it. There's so much polling data that has demonstrated this. And there's a new poll out today from Gallup, which I think is the best polling agency to survey general attitudes, not necessarily the day-by-day presidential race. That's not really what they do, but they are very comprehensive and very reliable in surveying the kind of deep-seated opinions and ethos that Americans have, and they break them up by category, and their data is often extremely revealing. And here's a report from Gallup that was issued just today where you see the headline, quote, "Partisans differ most on the ratings of the CDC, FBI, and Homeland Security." And this is an article this is a survey that attempted to determine how Americans think about various federal agencies, specifically by political ideology or party. And the question was, how would you rate the job being done by each? Excellent, good, or only poor, only fair or poor? And here are the results. And I mean, it really is remarkable. So first of all, here's the CDC. I don't even think that's a surprise. I don't consider the CDC part of the security state, but given how much we know that the CDC erred and made inaccurate statements and false statements 65% of Americans rate the CDC as good, less than 20%, fewer than 20% of Republicans do. But here's the FBI, which obviously is a crucial part of the security state. Of the FBI is the agency that was run by J. Edgar Hoover for decades throughout the 20th century. It was the agency that hunted down leftists as communists and using, in the 1960s, all sorts of programs of illegal infiltration with COINTELPRO and all of those programs to infiltrate the anti-war movement or the civil rights movement, put spies in there, put agent provocateurs in there, all of which was revealed in the 1970s during the Church Commission and those investigations that led to all the things that we learned about the CIA. And here's the FBI, which was heavily involved in things like COINTELPRO. That was a program that came from the FBI. Some leftist radicals broke into an office, a branch office in Pennsylvania of the FBI, and took those files, and it was revealed that the FBI was putting into every anti-war group about the Vietnam War, every civil rights group, all sorts of spies infiltrating these groups, agent provocateurs that encourage these groups to engage in illegal or violent activity of the kind they wouldn't have engaged in absent the FBI's encouragement, things that we've seen through the war on terror and then again in the Trump age, including at January 6th. So this is the FBI that's doing this, and here you see the FBI among left liberals is almost as popular as the CDC is. There you see it's about 65% as well. And yet here again, in terms of any skepticism that you want for the FBI, you have to go to this red dot, which represents people who are Republicans or identify as Republicans or lean Republicans, and it's barely 20% of the people who rate the FBI favorably versus 65% of Democrats who do so. Imagine traveling back to the 1970s, 80s, certainly the 1960s, even the 1990s, and showing people this chart. Nobody would believe it. There's no way people would comprehend something like this. Here's the Department of Homeland Security, which is now sort of a accepted part of our democratic government framework. But in reality, unlike the CIA and the FBI, which have been in existence for decades, the FBI early in the 20th century, the CIA as part of the CIA as part of the National Security Act 1947 after World War II and the Cold War began when the National Security State was created. Homeland Security was only created in 2002. It was an initiative by George Bush and Dick Cheney to say that we need an overarching agency that manages all of the different security state agencies, another layer on top of all this massive, sprawling, secretive part of our government that we already had. At the time, this was an extremely controversial measure because people were saying the last thing we need is another layer of massive bureaucracy that will have all of these massive powers. This was right after the Patriot Act, and people started saying, what is it that we're doing to our government? That was what the Department of Homeland Security represented. And there were a good number of Democrats who opposed to it. And now you look at this, and also at the Department of Homeland Security, you have 65% or maybe actually above 50% of Democrats who support the Department of Homeland Security, and then about 13 or 12% of Republicans who do. I mean, look at these gaps in the level of trust that both Republicans and Democrats place in these security state institutions, these secretive, unaccountable, undemocratic agencies. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, well, this only is happening because this is under a Democratic administration. It's typically the case that Democrats trust these agencies when it's a Democrat running it, but don't trust them when it's a Republican. That's not true. As I'm going to show you, this has been a trend, long time coming, that we also saw when Donald Trump was the president, was running the executive branch, and Democrats increasingly embraced the CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, and the Pentagon as the agencies that they most trusted. Here is the CIA. The CIA. I try to imagine what it would be like to go back and just tell some leftist activists in the 1960s, the 1970s, 1980s, that in just a couple decades, the only opposition to and skepticism of the CIA that you're going to hear is on the populist right wing of the Republican Party, whereas the Democrats are going to be overwhelmingly in favor of it. Not just Democrats, but even the left wing of the Democratic Party will never speak ill of these agencies. This is just unbelievable and remarkable. Here is 55% or so of people who are Democrats who rate the CIA as doing a good job, whereas just over 20%, maybe 25% of Republicans do. That's the CIA. And then here you see the Defense Department, the Pentagon, where Republican support is a little higher. It's about 32%, and yet 65% of Democrats think the Pentagon is doing a good job. The Pentagon that spends almost $1 trillion a year that it can't keep track of, that it can't pass an audit for, that it pours into the endless pockets of Raytheon and Boeing and General Dynamic that's filled with people who came from those companies who now run the Pentagon. 65% of Democrats favorably rate the Pentagon. And you can go through pretty much the entire set of agencies where Democrats trust it more, including the Department of Justice, although the difference is a little bit less there, as well as the Secret Service. But the big items are these agencies, the opposition to which to basically used to define who was on the left and who was on the right. Now, as I said, this has been a long time coming. This is not some sort of new trend that only is happening because Donald Trump's no longer president. Here from January 4th, 2017, this was in the interval between Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016 and the time right before Donald Trump took office on January 20th of 2017. And what was going on in this interval was that the CIA and the FBI has spent the whole campaign feeding to the Washington Post and the New York Times fabricated stories, all anonymously, claiming that the Trump campaign had conspired with the Russian government to hack into the emails of the DNC and John Podesta's email, a conspiracy theory, classic conspiracy theory, that Robert Mueller, despite 18 months of unlimited investigation, concluded there was no evidence for. And so Trump had basically identified that the enemies of his in Washington were the agencies that are supposed to be under his control as part of the executive branch, and Democrats also realized that those agencies had now become their political allies, not just when a Democrat is president, but also when a Republican president was incoming during the campaign, and then also once he was president. So here from NBC News in January of 2017, you see the headline, Democrats now give the CIA higher marks than Republicans do. Quote, that's a really big shift. Public perceptions of the intelligence community have a whole lot to do with politics. Quote, President-elect Donald Trump has spent the week since the election openly questioning the CIA's assessments about Russian interference in the fall contest, prompting his foes to laud the apolitical and fundamentally patriotic mission of Americans' intelligence officers. Let me just say that again, because this is exactly what happened. Once Trump started contesting the CIA's findings, which, by the way, were a lie, shocking that the CIA spread lies in order to achieve their political ends inside the United States, what ended up happening was that his foes, Trump's foes, namely Democrats, started to cheer, to laud the apolitical and fundamentally patriotic mission of America's intelligence officers. Democrats started cheering for and embracing this idea that the CIA was a benevolent, apolitical actor defending democracy. That's how liberals, especially the huge number of liberals who only began paying attention to politics in 2016, as a result of Donald Trump, have no idea what the CIA did before, have no idea what the history was. They were told the CIA were the good guys because they were trying to stop Trump. And that's what even this NBC article goes on to say. And then it continues, quote, but as with so many other U.S. institutions, public perceptions of the intelligence community have a whole lot to do with politics. While the CIA still remains relatively popular, much more so than Congress or either political party, the past 2 decades have shown significant fluctuations in how Republicans and Democrats view the agency, according to polling conducted by NBC and the Wall Street Journal. Asked for the first time since the survey asked about the CIA back in 2002, Democrats now have a more positive view of the nation's foreign intelligence agency than Republicans do. That was 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. Actually, 7 years ago. So you see this trend going on for a long time, and this is when it started happening, and at the time, NBC was shocked that just Democrats marginally trusted the CIA more than the Republicans did because it's a massive radical change in our politics. And yet over the last 7 years, through the Trump presidency into the Biden administration, that gap has grown larger and larger and larger to the point where the Democratic Party really is the party that believes in and trusts and wants to embrace and follow and obey and preserve the power of America's leading institutions. They feel the same way about corporate media. They're the only ones who trust it. They feel the same way about big banks. They're so happy when Goldman Sachs comes and endorses Kamala Harris. they feel that way about every ruling class institution. They basically are institutionalist establishment servants. And a major part of the Republican Party is, too, the establishment wing led by people like Mitch McConnell. That's what they represent. That's why they're so close to the Democrats. But Trump created a movement that feels great hostility towards these institutions and created all this space on the Republican Party and on the right wing of American politics where it never previously existed, to understand that these agencies are pernicious and sinister and by no means some sort of benevolent force in our politics. Now, here you see a chart that gives even more of a historical perspective. It shows the net favorability of the CIA by party affiliation. So here you see it starts in 2002, 2003. So this is after 9/11. George Bush and Dick Cheney are in office. And the difference was not that big. Republicans only had a 5% net favorability view of the CIA. And the 20%, negative 20% among Democrats was pretty standard. But then as the war on terror went on and we started to have controversies like the CIA torture program and the CIA due process-free prison program in Guantanamo and Bagram and CIA black sites, and then the use of the NSA to spy on Americans without the warrants required by law, most Republicans at the time were highly supportive of the war on terror and the agencies implementing it. And so you see this Republican view grow to a big 45% favorability rating for the CIA, whereas the Democrats even got more unfavorable, where they had a 25% gap. And then you see when Obama becomes president, there's this massive increase, a steady increase. Here's 2008, 2009. Once Obama takes office, you see this massive increase on the part of Democrats, who by 2011, 2012, under Obama, now have a 52% positive rating difference but still, Republicans are still very trustworthy of the CIA, even under Obama. And then you only see this change, this decline, as we head into the 2016 election, and then this complete reversal right after 2016. This is the realignment that Donald Trump ushered in, that so many people, especially in the left-wing sector of American politics, refuse to see, don't understand, cannot comprehend. Because in their minds, those of who even think about this, the Democratic parties are always the good guys. They're always the ones who are opposed to the U.S. security state and its abuses. And no matter how much you show them, shove in their face all of this data for years now, that the parties have completely switched when it comes to this question. They won't acknowledge it. They won't comprehend it. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.